One of the most beloved of our modern day saints is Mother Teresa. She ministered in Calcutta in India. She established a religious order of nuns called the Missionaries of Charity. And while many religious orders are declining or even dying out these days, the Missionaries of Charity continues to grow and thrive, and they are active in more than 130 countries around the world. Mother Teresa ministered to those that Jesus called the least of these, to the outcasts, the untouchables. She was called the saint of the gutters because she went out into the streets of Calcutta where the poor and the helpless are often left to die in the gutters. She established a hospice and brought them there to care for them. She ministered to those with AIDS, with leprosy, with tuberculosis, those who were abandoned and discarded by society. She's known for saying that people think that poverty is hunger and homelessness, but the greatest poverty is being unwanted. She's also known for saying that she ministers to them because they are Jesus in disguise. The Word made flesh, living among us, lying in the gutters, unwanted. That's a hard idea for us to get our minds around. It was hard for the people of Jesus' time. The people of Israel then were sort of living in their own Advent season. They were waiting. They were watching for a Messiah, a Savior to come, someone who would rescue them from desperate times. They were looking for someone who had power and authority, someone who was strong, wealthy, with military resources. What they weren't expecting was a poor, helpless baby born in an obscure cave to a poor peasant couple who nobody knew, someone who grew up to be essentially homeless, apolitical, non-military, a pacifist, and who was crucified as a criminal. Not who they were expecting. And it's a hard concept for us to get our minds around as well. Honestly, it is hard for us to ascribe value and worth to the poor and the homeless, to the unemployed, to the prisoner, to the refugee, to the disabled, to the mentally ill. We have pity for them. We have compassion for them. We just don't want to be them. Because we're taught that value and worth come from being strong and healthy and attractive, from being well educated and capable and independent, from being prosperous and being successful. Jesus came to turn that understanding completely upside down. Jesus taught that it is when we feed the hungry and clothe the naked and care for the sick and visit the prisoner and welcome the outsider that we meet him. A few weeks ago, Stephen told us a bit about Father Greg Boyle. Actually, personally, I hope that he is on his way to sainthood. He has ministered for more than 30 years to street gangs in Los Angeles. He celebrates Mass at 25 different juvenile detention centers. He speaks at least 200 times a year to social workers, to doctors, to law enforcement, to teachers, to pastors. He says that when he first began working with street gangs, one of the first things he discovered is that gang violence is a lethal absence of hope. He said, nobody ever met a hopeful kid who joined a street gang. He many times tried to broker treaties between rival street gangs, but he said they never lasted for very long, and that cycle of violence just repeated itself over and over. What brought hope to street gang kids was jobs. But there weren't very many employers who were willing to hire a known street gang member who probably didn't have a diploma, probably did have a prison record, was usually covered with tattoos, and had an attitude. And so he began something called Homeboy Industries. Started with Homeboy Bakery. He found an investor, and they bought an old abandoned bakery that was across the street from his parish church. And he invited rival gang members who were interested to come and run it, to get to know one another, to work together, to make a go of it, and to share in the profits. It was not easy. He had to recruit a lot of people to come and provide things like just some basic education, sometimes reading, adding and subtracting, understanding basic business practices, providing legal assistance, counseling, and sometimes even tattoo removal. They made a go of it. It grew, and pretty soon there was a home girls cafe serving food from the Homeboys Bakery. And then there was a Homeboys Maintenance, a homegirls salon. There was Homeboys Silk Screening, Homeboys Merchandising. Today, Homeboy Industries supports more than 10,000 young people who are trying to work their way out of gang life, who are trying to overcome their past, reimagine their futures. And I understand that Homeboy Bakery has actually become a stop for some of the LA tour buses. It is not easy. More than once, one of those businesses has been burned to the ground, and employees have been shot by their former gang associates. Father Greg has done more than 300 funerals of young men and women trying to build a new way of life. He has written a powerful book called Tattoos on the Heart, where he tells the stories of some of these young men and women that he has worked with and come to know and love. He says that unfortunately, he had to tell some of these stories at their funerals. One of the young men he talks about is named Cesar. He had known Cesar almost all of his life. He first met him when he was just a little kid at a tent city that had been built outside the housing projects that were damaged in an earthquake. And this frightened little kid came up to him looking for reassurance and asking, is it going to be okay? Are we all going to die? Cesar did not have a father around. He had left. Before he did, he had beaten Cesar with a pipe. So without much adult guidance, Cesar eventually joined a street gang. He was in and out of prison ever since then. And during that time, this little kid grew up to be this huge, menacing-looking man. But he was still that scared little kid inside. He had just finished a 4-year prison stint when he called Father Greg for help. And he said, I don't have any place to live. My girlfriend, she left and she burned all my stuff. So Father Greg went and picked him up. He took him to J.C. Penney, gave him $200, waited while he bought some clothes, and then took him to a friend's to drop him off. When he got out of the car, Cesar said, G, everybody called him G for Greg. He said, G, I'm scared. I don't want to go back. Well, later that night, about 3 a.m., Father Greg's phone rang, and it was Cesar. He said, Gee, I just have to ask you something. I have to know. He said, I've always thought of you as my father ever since I was a little kid, right? What about you? Have I been your son? Father Greg said, of course you have. Cesar says, phew. And then there was a long silence, and Father Greg could hear him sobbing. And Cesar said, so you're really my father, right? And I'm your son. Nothing will ever separate us. Father Greg said, that's exactly right. When Father Greg speaks and he tells people Cesar's story, he says, what I want you to know is that when Cesar called me that night, he wasn't wanting to know whether he had a father. He was wanting to know whether he was a son worth having. People who live in these communities are bombarded with messages of shame and worthlessness and being unacceptable. But Father Greg says as he has come to know them and work with them, he has seen courage, decency, nobility, holiness, and the face of God. And he says compassion is not standing in judgment of the poor. Compassion is standing in awe of who they are and what they carry. Father Greg was one of 8 children. They lived with their parents in a large, old, rambling house with an attic. And their parents told them, never, never go up into the attic. And that was because the attic didn't have a solid floor. It just had some random planks to keep things from falling through into the ceiling below. So, what do you do when your parents say never? Well, they were up there all the time. And on one of their forays to rummage through what was up there, They found a box of old record albums. As they sort through it, they find an album that had been recorded by their mother. It had their mother's name on it. Little did they know that before she got married and had 8 children, their mother had been an opera singer. They brought that record down, they got out their toy phonograph. You guys probably don't even know what those are, but got out their toy phonograph and started to play and just heard this amazing, magical voice. He said that over the years, they played that record until they wore the grooves off of it. The song that their mother had recorded was "O Holy Night." And he says that the words from that song that were engraved on his heart forever were the words, "Till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth." The Word made flesh. The Word made flesh in Jesus. The Word made flesh in Mother Teresa and in Father Greg. The Word made flesh in Cesar, in the poor lying in the gutter. And the Word made flesh in you and in me. Friends, Christmas, the incarnation, is not about or just about a baby born in Bethlehem long ago. It is about Jesus being born in you and me. It is about the Word made flesh in our vulnerable and broken and often fearful hearts. And it is about our souls' infinite worth as children of God.